Welcome. My name is Dr. Dieter, and today I'm going to take us through the science of modern day diseases. We now have more and more evidence that most of the chronic medical conditions that we face today as a result of metabolic dysfunction. Metabolic dysfunction is just simply a fancy medical term to say energy shortage. So, for the purpose of this talk, anytime you hear me say metabolic dysfunction, you could substitute that for energy shortage. So, there is now more evidence that the diseases that face us in modern day society, the high blood pressure, the PCOS, the diabetes, the cancer, the sleep apnea, the gout, you name any of those chronic diseases as a result of an energy shortage. That energy shortage then results in the chronic diseases that plague us. That energy shortage in itself is coming from two things. One of which is insulin resistance contributing to that energy shortage. And the second is what we call microbiome dysfunction or dysbiosis. These two things result in metabolic dysfunction, and that metabolic dysfunction then results in the chronic day diseases. So, what I would like to do is take each of them, insulin resistance and microbiome dysfunction, and talk about how they contribute to the metabolic dysfunction that then drives the diseases that we face in modern day society. So let's start with insulin resistance. What is insulin resistance? To understand what insulin resistance is important to understand what insulin does in the first place. Another simpler way, first of all, to say to insulin resistance is just simply that your insulin is not working well. So, what is insulin resistance? Or how does your insulin go from working well to not working well? So let's first understand what insulin is and what the job of insulin is. So insulin is a very, very critical hormone in the body. I consider insulin to be the most important hormone in the body. I call insulin hormone numero uno in terms of importante. Insulin is like the CEO of the body. It dictates the smooth structure and functioning of the body. And why is that? It's because of this job of insulin. This is the job of insulin. Job of insulin is to mobilize glucose out of the blood into the cell. You see, when we eat, the end product of absorption is the release of glucose into the blood. The job of insulin is to get that glucose out of the blood into the cell. Okay. When insulin now mobilizes glucose into the cell, what happens is that glucose is now fed through an organelle in the cell called the mitochondria. You may remember in your junior science class that the mitochondria was called the powerhouse of the cell. So, in the mitochondria, the glucose goes through a complex series of reactions called the electron transport chain, with the result of a production of an energy molecule called ATP. Okay, so ATP is an energy molecule. So that's the job of insulin, to help produce energy. So every cell in the body requires energy to function. Things don't happen in a vacuum. There's seven energy dependent functions of the cell that make the body work. And if those seven energy dependent functions do not have the energy they need to drive them, the cell malfunctions. So, why then is insulin the most important hormone and it's like the CEO of the body? It's because without insulin, you don't produce energy, and every cell of the body requires energy to function. A simple definition for a disease is a cell that has malfunction, or a group of cells or tissues of organ that has malfunction. And why has the cell or the tissue or the organ malfunctioned? Because it's lacked energy. So insulin is that critical because it helps to secure energy. Now that you understand what the job of insulin is, and by the way, insulin is a hormone. Now that you understand what insulin does, what then is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is simply when there is a breakdown in this process. Anywhere where there is a breakdown of insulin mobilizing glucose out of the blood into the cell so that energy can be produced. Anywhere in this chat where there is a breakdown, we say you have insulin resistance, and we say that your insulin is not working well. Now, how does that happen? How do you go from your insulin not working well to your insulin working well? Or how does insulin resistance occur? And there are two ways in which we develop insulin resistance. The first way in which we develop insulin resistance is what I call too much fat. Okay. And the second way in which we develop insulin resistance is what we call too much too much insulin. So too much fat and too much insulin. Now, if you've ever heard of too much of a good thing is a bad thing, well, too much fat and too much insulin are gonna tell you just exactly that. Are gonna depict just exactly that. So let's start with number one, too much insulin. You see, when we eat, all the food that we eat, the body converts all the calories that we have, the body converts that into glucose. Body is going to take some of that glucose and use it here and now and then store the rest as glycogen. Anything that is in excess of what the body needs, the body converts the excess calories into fat. Okay. So let's say you have a cell like this, that a cell is normally supposed to look like this. You consume now way more calories than you're supposed to. Those way more calories that you've consumed, the excess of those calories now get converted into fat. The body, I'm going to do a replica of this cell. The body now takes that fat and stores that fat and lumps that fat into this cell like this. So this cell now becomes what I call a fat-laden cell. Fat-laden, okay? Now, normally the job of insulin is that when there is glucose in the blood, insulin is going to command this cell to say, hey, there is glucose in the blood. I want you to take up glucose. This cell, which is normally like that, is going to take up the glucose. But when you come to this cell, which is fat laden, when insulin comes and knocks on the door of the cell, knock, 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 hey cell, I got glucose in the blood. I want you to take it up so you could pass it through the electron transport chain so that energy could be made. You know what this cell tells insulin? This cell tells insulin, I'm sorry, I don't have any room in the inn. If I were to bring glucose in, he will have no place to lay his head. I am fat laden, I am filled with fat. I have no place to receive glucose. And so the cell refuses to open its doors to glucose. Glucose doesn't enter the cell to go through the electron transport chain to make energy. You have a breakdown of that process. So you have a breakdown in insulin doing the job that it's supposed to do. That's the first way in which we develop insulin resistance. Now, um, what this cell is doing is that this cell is trying to protect itself. Think about Thanksgiving. Have you ever eaten too much on Thanksgiving? This is exactly how the cell is feeling. Like, hey, when you're eating too much on Thanksgiving, you are so stuffed. The last thing in the world that you're thinking about doing is to put in another bite of anything into your mouth. Even if that bite of the next thing of anything is your most favorite pecan pie, that is your grandmother's recipe that you long for. You feel so stuffed, it disgusts you to even think about putting a spoon in your mouth of any other thing. Now that is exactly how this cell is feeling. This cell is feeling so stuffed with fat. Its favorite food, the favorite dessert or food for the cell is glucose. But the cell is so stuffed, the last thing in his mind is thinking about is eating its favorite dessert, bringing in glucose. It tells the insulin no one. And so that's what happens. Now, when that happens, glucose accumulates in the blood. Okay. Glucose accumulates in the blood when that happens because it cannot enter the cell. One thing I want you guys to understand is that there is a one-to-one relationship between the concentration of glucose in the blood and the amount of insulin that is produced by the pancreas. Okay. So glucose accumulates in the blood. When glucose accumulates in the blood, it triggers the pancreas now to produce too much insulin, a higher amount of insulin to address the glucose load. Like we're going to produce much more insulin to try to force this glucose, which is accumulating in the blood, into the cell. Now, that results in the second way in which you develop insulin resistance, where your insulin is not working. Too much insulin is no bueno. Even though insulin is such an important hormone, when insulin becomes too much in the blood, it becomes a bad thing. I want you to think about it this way. Remember, I described insulin like the CEO of the body. It dictates the smooth structure and functioning of the body. Imagine a CEO of a corporation who is level headed, who has been running the corporation smoothly. And one day that CEO comes to work and he has gone crazy. He's gone nuts. He's yelling at people left and right. He is tyrannical. He's being a bully, shoving people left and right, coming to people's desks, yelling at them, embarrassing them, giving people unreasonable demands, firing employees for no good reason. He just goes off. That is when a CEO like that, who is meant to dictate the smooth structure and functioning of the company, becomes tyrannical, unreasonable, the employees of that CEO lose respect for the CEO. Now, when the employees of the CEO lose respect for the CEO, it makes it harder for the employees to do what the CEO has. For example, if I have a boss that I have lost my respect for the boss for one reason or the other, if my boss comes to me and tells me, "Hey, Dr. Dieter, listen, we have this project that we need to turn in the next 30 days. Can you get it over the line for me?" Well, I don't want to lose my job, so I'm gonna do the project for the boss. But I've lost my respect for the boss, so I'm not excited about doing the project. So if I'm the kind of person who usually brings my A game to a project because I've lost my respect for the boss, instead of bringing my A game, I may bring my B plus or my C game to that project. So I get the project over the line, but I don't do it to the best that I can. You translate that to the cell. When insulin is running too much, too high, it's like a CEO that has gone crazy, acting like a bully. Insulin is being a bully and a tyrant to the cells, yelling at the cells, saying, "You must take up glucose," a high tone to the cells. The cells lose their respect for that high tone insulin and say, "Okay, I can't deal with that kind of attitude coming from the boss man." When the cell loses its respect for insulin, what happens is that the cell is less amenable, or the cell is less excited about doing what insulin asks it to do. So, if insulin, the job of insulin is to tell the cell, "Open your doors yea wide so that I can let glucose, so that glucose can come in." But since the cell has lost its respect for insulin because insulin is being a bully and a tyrant, when insulin asks the cell, "Open your doors yea wide so that I can let glucose into the cell," what the cell does is that the cell reluctantly obeys the command of insulin. And instead of opening its doors yea wide, the cell opens its doors yea wide. So a narrower door, it does it, but doesn't do it to the best of what insulin is asking. So a smaller door means that less glucose is gonna come in through a smaller door. So more glucose then is going to accumulate in the blood because less glucose is getting into the cell. That more glucose that accumulates in the blood is a trigger for the pancreas to produce even more insulin. When the pancreas produces even more insulin, it's like a CEO of the company that was crazy this level and raises his cuckoo-ness, his craziness to this level. The employees of that CEO now lose even more respect for the CEO who has gone from this crazy to this crazy. You translate that to the cell. When insulin levels are running even higher, the cell loses even more respect for insulin. When the cell loses even more respect for insulin, the cell is lesser and lesser likely to do what insulin asks it to do. So when insulin asks it to open its doors initially yay wide, the cell had its doors this wide. Now that the cell has lost even more respect for insulin, when insulin asks it to open its doors, it, it shuts its doors, it keeps its doors yay wide instead of as wide as this. So the doors become narrower and more glucose accumulates in the blood. That triggers the process of more insulin again. So you have a repeated cycle of insulin being high, causing the cells to lose respect for it, causing more glucose to accumulate in the blood, triggering more insulin. So just a vicious cycle. So that is how insulin resist. That is how the cell you develop insulin resistance through too much fat and too much insulin. Now, when you have insulin resistance, it results in a deficiency of energy. And when you have a deficiency of energy, then you start having all of these illnesses that come as a result of energy. Remember, the job of insulin is to mobilize glucose into the cell so that energy can be produced, ATP. And I said that every cell in the body requires energy to function. In the absence of sufficient energy, the cell malfunctions. When a cell malfunctions, you can have high blood pressure, you can have heart disease, you can have fatty liver. I don't want you to hear insulin and only think about diabetes. A lot of people hear insulin and think about diabetes. No, insulin resistance is the root. It's the cause of diabetes. It's also the cause of cancer, also the cause of obesity, also the cause of heart disease, Alzheimer's, migraines. And unfortunately, these diseases which are enumerated here are not exhaustive. I cannot find a slide that is big enough to be able to encompass all the modern day diseases that come as a result of insulin resistance because of the shortage of energy. So, this is just a depiction of some of the things that go wrong when your insulin is not working well. Cancer, only 10 to 30% of cancers are due to bad luck genetic. The other 70% of cancers come as a result of energy deficiency. You don't have enough ATP because insulin is not working well. So that's one prong. We talked that there are we said that there are two things that contribute to the energy shortage. So we've talked about insulin resistance. The other thing we mentioned is this called microbiome dysfunction, or what we call dysbiosis. What is microbiome dysfunction? First, to understand what microbiome dysfunction is important to understand what the microbiome is in the first place. Okay, the microbiome, is a microbial population of about 30 to 100 trillion bacteria that live in the gut. Okay, it's 30 to 100 trillion bacteria are what we call the microbiome. Now, we live in what we call a symbiotic relationship with these organisms. They live in a large column. The symbiotic relationship means that we live in a do for me, I do for you, scratch my back, I scratch yours, kind of a quid quo pro. And what we do for these bacteria is that we're supposed to provide them food and shelter, and in turn, they're supposed to provide us these functions here, health functions. One of the things that the microbiome helps to do is it helps to break down fiber. Another thing is that it protects the gut from pathogenic bacteria. The word pathogenic just simply means disease causing bacteria. And the way these organisms protect the gut from disease causing bacteria is by production of a very special fatty acid called a short chain fatty acid. Short chain fatty acids cannot be gotten from foods. They are only produced by the biological activity of this 30 to 100 trillion of bacteria. Now, the short chain fatty acids go and help protect the gut from disease causing bacteria. How do they do that? I want you to think about the cells of the gut as being lined to each other, one to the other, one to the other, like my knuckle, forming the wall of the colon. Okay, so think about multiple fists coming together like this, forming the wall of the colon. Now, at the junction where my fists come together, right here, my knuckles come together, it's called the tight junction. The tight junction. These junctions keep are at the security checkpoints of the gut. These short chain fatty acids go and pour, they're like cement, they go on, or concrete, they go and pour concrete or cement in this area to make it tight so that it's not leaky. Because when it's leaky, bacteria or toxins can leave from the gut and spill into the bloodstream and cause an infection. So the microbiome helps to protect the gut from pathogenic bacteria by causing the tightness in those junctions. Let me depict it in this other way. Um, you have a cell like this. This is one cell and another cell. Okay, where the cells meet together right here is called the tight junction. Okay, the short chain fatty acids go and pour concrete to make this junction tight. When this junction is tight, things cannot leak. If this junction is not tight, the opposite, it will look like this. Um, it will look like this, where you may have a weakness. Instead of having this situation here, you have it like that. And there is a weakness in this wall where bacteria can now leak and get into the blood and cause infections. So that is how the short chain fatty acids protect us from pathogenic bacteria. The other thing which is very important is that this microbiome helps in training the immune system on how to react. You may not know it, but 70% of the body's immune system resides in the gut. 70%. The other 30% of the immune system resides in the bone marrow, the lymph nodes, the lymphatic. And the microbiome is responsible for training the immune system, this bacteria. So when the gut is healthy, when the microbiome is healthy, it trains the immune system in a healthy way to react to bacteria or toxins. The immune system is a defense line. So a healthy training of the immune system will look like this. Hey, immune system, do you see that bacteria right there? That bacteria is a bad guy. He deserves to die, or he's going to cause you some problems in the body. But you know what? It's a very weak bacteria. You could take that bacteria out with a simple David sling and a stone. You don't even need a gun for that bacteria. Just a simple stone with a David sling will take that bacteria out. Then you will tell the immune system, you see that other bacteria there? He's a bad dude. He's a bad dude. And for him, you need a handgun for him. Just one bullet with a handgun will take him out. You don't need an AK-47 or a grenade. That'll be an overkill. Just a handgun will take him out. And then it trains the immune system further to say, hey, do you see that guy right there? And the immune system says, what guy? I said, that guy right there. The immune system says, what guy? I don't see the guy. And the microbiome says, the reason you do not see that guy right there is that he's in camouflage. He's wearing camo. That guy right there, be careful. He's not the enemy. He's part of us. He's doing some reconnaissance work. That's why he's in camo. Please don't fire any bullets at him. Don't try to harm him. He's part of us. So that's a healthy training of the immune system. When the microbiome is unhealthy, the microbiome trains the immune system in an unhealthy way. And the unhealthy way means that the immune system becomes hyper reactive. The immune system has a finger, has a trigger happy finger ready to shoot first and ask questions later when the microbiome is unhealthy. And that looks like this. Hey, you see that bacteria there? He's a bad guy. You could probably take him out with a stone, just a David sling and a stone. But you know what? He's bad anyway. Why use a stone when you could fire a bullet? Let's use a bullet on him. Use a handgun on him, whereas you could have taken him out with a stone. So an overkill. It may see another bacteria that you could easily kill with just a simple handgun. It tells the immune system that guy needs to die. He's a bad guy. Yes, you could take him out with just one bullet, but why do one bullet when you can spray him AK-47 style? Let's have some fun. So an overkill also, causing the immune system to be trigger happy. And then the last thing that he could tell the immune system is, you see that guy right there, it looks like he's in camouflage. He may be one of us, but he may not be one of us. I don't know. You know what? Let's just blow his head off. I don't have time to figure out whether he's the enemy or he's one of us. Let's just blow his head off. We're going to take him to the autopsy table and we're going to determine whether he was the enemy or was one of us. And the immune system now attacks the body cell that was in camouflage, looking as if it's a bacteria, but not a bacteria. And therein lies how you have autoimmune diseases when the immune system attacks the body cells at the command or at the training of an unhealthy gut, an unhealthy microbiome. And the last function of the microbiome is that it helps in the synthesis of B vitamins and K vitamins. When you now, what then is dysbiosis or microbiome dysfunction? Dysbiosis is an imbalance in the microbial population. You see, the bacteria in the gut, 50% of the bacteria in the gut are what you call bad bacteria. And the other 50% of the bacteria in the gut are what you call good bacteria. So they live in a 50-50% population. They balance each other out. We say you have dysbiosis or microbiome dysfunction when the good bacteria, are outnumbered and the bad bacteria proliferate. So the bad bacteria become, let's say, 70% and the good bacteria become 30%. Now, what happens? What causes this imbalance? In the microbial population is the shortage of food. You see, the food for the microbiome is fiber. Fiber is one of those foods that passes through the GI tract intact. Humans do not have the enzymes to be able to digest fiber. We don't. And fiber is food for the microbiome. Unfortunately, we do not consume enough fiber in this day and age. So when we do not consume enough fiber, there is a shortage of food. When there is a shortage of food, it sets into motion panic and survival of the fetus. It's just like when there is a hurricane, or let me use the COVID pandemic. When there was a COVID pandemic, there was survival of the fetus. You go to the grocery store, all the bread is off the shelf, all the tissue paper is off the shelf, all the milk is off the shelf. And if people are rushing to get what they can get, survival of the fetus. When there is a shortage of fiber because our foods are so processed, we're not consuming enough fiber. The bad bacteria, that are the stronger bacteria, what they do is that they hoard the little fiber, the little food that is there to themselves. And after they hoard that little food that is there to themselves, they say, let us go ahead and increase our army. Because if we increase our army, we can then keep a hold on this little fiber that is there. which results in the imbalance of the microbial population, which is what we call dysbiosis, microbiome dysfunction. Now, when you have dysbiosis, it results in a slew of diseases like this. Remember, the microbiome is in charge of training the immune system. When the microbiome is unhealthy, it gives the immune system an unhealthy training. The immune system has its finger ready on the trigger, attacking the body cells. Lupus, an autoimmune disease, comes from dysbiosis. Hashimoto's, these are autoimmune diseases. MS, an autoimmune disease. Celiac, an autoimmune disease. Uh, um, 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 some of the other diseases on here, colon cancer, hugely linked to dysbiosis. Type 2 diabetes, in addition to it being linked to insulin resistance, is also being linked to dysbiosis. So again, this slide is not exhaustive. It's just a depiction of some of the diseases. We cannot find a slide big enough to enumerate all the diseases that come as a result of dysbiosis. So I want to highlight two diseases on here, or two conditions on here: anxiety and depression. You may be surprised to see that anxiety and depression is related to dysbiosis, but the biology makes sense. You may not know it, but the hormone serotonin, which is our happy hormone, some people call it a hormone, some people call it a neurotransmitter. That hormone serotonin is supposed to maintain our mood. Okay, helps to maintain our mood. 90% of that hormone is produced in the gut. The other 10% of serotonin, which maintains our mood, is produced in the central nervous system. Now, if you have two factories, if you have an industry that puts out 10,000 tons of steel every month, okay, and one of the industries, it has two locations. One location only puts out one location only industry that puts out 100,000 tons of steel every month and takes to the market. You have one location that only puts out 10,000 tons of steel, and the other location that puts out 90,000 tons of steel. The 90,000 is the main bulk of the market. So if the factory that puts out 90,000 tons of steel, if that factory now breaks down, a good chunk of the amount of steel will not come to the market, right? So that's what happens here with anxiety and depression, because 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. When the gut is unhealthy, this huge chunk of serotonin is not produced. You have anxiety and depression. So that is dysbiosis. This other slide here, I call this slide the metabolic sequence of inflammation. And it starts with insulin resistance and dysbiosis causing a fire. Okay, that fire, sorry, let's do this. Insulin resistance and dysbiosis causing a fire. That fire spreads to metabolic dysfunction, energy shortage. That energy shortage now affects the cell and causes what we call oxidative stress and injury to the cell. Anytime a cell is injured, the cell is going to cry out to the immune system. The immune system's way of protecting the cell is to deploy an inflammatory response to the cell. So the immune system deploys an inflammatory response to the cell, but when it deploys an inflammatory response to the cell, it's coming to try to solve the problem in this cell. But when it comes here, it sees smoke. It doesn't see the fire. The fire started 2 houses ago, had insulin resistance, spread to metabolic dysfunction, and came to the cell. So the immune system is not really able to solve the problem because the core of the problem is not in the cell. The core of the problem is 2 houses away where the fire started. So this continues. And as this continues, you have a situation where the cell continues to cry to the immune system. The immune system is deploying inflammation, 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 inflammation to address the problem which is not happening in this, which is not found in the cell. So you now have a chronic inflammatory state which drives diseases and symptoms. Any disease that ends with tis, diverticulitis, sinusitis, arthritis, any disease that ends with tis has to do with inflammation. It's the immune system that is chronically in overdrive because of this fire. Now, there is good news because there is now science that if you reverse the core of the problem, you reverse the insulin resistance and reverse the dysbiosis that resulted in the energy shortage, those diseases go away. And I like to put it this way with this depiction. If you have a car and that car is you're driving that car on the road and the car runs out of gas, what happens is that the car stops. The car stops not because of intrinsic failure of the engine. No, the car stops because its energy source, its fuel, its gas is gone. So if you are, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes from the nearest gas station, you walk to that gas station, you buy a gallon of gas, and you walk back to your car on the side of the road and you put gas in that car. When you go and sit back in the driver's seat and you turn on the ignition, you hear the beautiful sound. The car roars back to life again. Now, if you have ever ran out of gas, I ran out of gas 2 times and it's embarrassing. But if you have ever ran out of gas in your life, when you put gas back in your car, you're not even you don't have the apprehension or the fear that, oh, I hope this car starts again. You don't, because you know that the problem was that the car ran out of gas. The thought doesn't even cross your mind. You're not worried that, oh, this car will not start again. It's just like a reflex that when you put gas back in the car starts. So it is with the body. It is so simple but so profound. These diseases that we have today in modern day society as a result of metabolic dysfunction and energy shortage. And that energy shortage, when that energy shortage is restored, just like putting gas back in the car that stopped on the side of the road, when that energy shortage is restored, those diseases which came as a result of the lack of energy go away. Your diabetes goes poof. Your high blood pressure goes poof. Your high cholesterol goes poof. Your irritable bowel syndrome goes poof. Your anxiety and depression goes poof. All those things disappear because you have restored the energy deficiency that caused those problems in the first place. And there is a solution that I would like to present to you. There is the solution is called the feel great system. There is this the health company that asked a very smart question. You see, if I were to give you a time machine and you went back 100 years in the past to look at how your great grandparents were living when they were alive, you're not gonna see any of these diseases. You're not gonna see anybody roaming around with PCOS or fatty liver or high blood pressure or diabetes or obesity. You will not see any of those. So this company asked the question, why is it that 100 years ago, diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, sleep apnea, gout, heart disease, stroke, these diseases did not exist? And they answered their own question by saying it had to do with the foods. Our ancestors ate foods that were rich in special phytonutrients that preserved their energy, that caused insulin to work well, that caused the gut to work well. So they asked the question, what if we can go back, look at the phytonutrients that our ancestors were consuming 100 years ago that caused their gut to be healthy, and that caused their gut to be healthy, and that caused their insulin to be working well, producing energy. And what if we could harness those phytonutrients, and put them in a simple product called a nutraceutical to give people the opportunity to be able to consume those same phytonutrients to maintain health. And that's how the feel great system, this solution was born. So this is a nutraceutical, and I want to define what a nutraceutical is. A nutraceutical is a product that is made 100% from plants and has health benefits that far outweigh the nutritional benefits. So these two products are what you call nutraceuticals. They're the products of the feel great system, and they help to go reverse insulin resistance and reverse dysbiosis, microbiome dysfunction. I want to talk about each of them individually. Let's start with the Unamate. The Unamate is made from a plant that is native to South America, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, called the yerba mate plant. The yerba mate plant. And one thing about the yerba mate plant is that it is very rich in a special phytonutrient, the polyphenol, chlorogenic acid, which is a polyphenol. And what the importance about polyphenol or chlorogenic acid is that it helps in lipolysis. Lipolysis is a fancy medical term to say fat burning. So this plays a huge role now in helping to reverse insulin resistance. If you will recall, the first way in which your insulin the first way in which you developed insulin resistance or insulin was not working well is when you had a cell that became fat laden filled with fat. Okay. When that cell was filled with fat, it could not take up glucose, and glucose accumulated in the blood. It couldn't take up glucose. Glucose accumulated in the blood. Now, the Unamate, its property is that it contains the polyphenol, which helps in lipolysis, which just means fat burning, to burn fat. Okay, fat burning. So when you consume the Unamate, what happens is that after consumption of the Unamate, lipolysis begins to occur in this cell, the burning of fat. And this cell now transforms from this fat laden state to maybe a state like this, where it has some fat, but not as much fat as it did before. And as lipolysis continues to occur with the Unamate, what happens is that that cell now transforms back to status quo, looking empty like this, where there is no fat in it. When there is no fat in this cell, it now has all this space in the cell now where glucose can enter the cell. So now glucose is able to enter the cell. When glucose enters the cell, it could go through the electron transport chain to make energy again, restoring the energy balance. So Unamate helps to reverse insulin resistance and restore the energy balance. Now, the other thing it does is that it helps to reverse the second stage of insulin resistance. Remember that when insulin was high, it triggered the pancreas to produce too much insulin. And remember, I described too much insulin like the CEO of the company that had gone crazy, became tyrannical and a bully, and his employees had lost respect for the CEO. Now, when the cell becomes free now like this and all that glucose gets into the cell, the concentration of glucose in the blood drops. When the concentration of glucose in the blood drops, a message is sent to the pancreas, that is the gland that produces insulin, to say, hey, we no longer need that much insulin. You could decrease the amount of insulin to a low amount of insulin. So the pancreas now reduces its insulin production to a low amount of insulin. Do you know what a low amount of insulin is like? It's like a CEO of the company who was initially crazy, who comes to work one day and calls a meeting with his employees and says, "Hey guys, I know that for the last 2 months I've been a jerk. I am very sorry. for the way I acted. He has a humble predisposition, a contrite heart. Please, will you forgive me for the things I did, the unreasonable things I said and demanded, and the scoldings and what have you? I'm going to make it right. That is what low insulin is. It's a CEO that has now become humble. When the CEO apologizes to his employees and has now become humble, the employees are taken by that humility and regain their respect back for their boss. And when they regain their respect back for their boss, they are more excited or more open to doing what their boss asked them to do. You translate that to the cell. When insulin now becomes low, the cell gains the insulin, it goes to the cell and tells the cell, you know what, I am sorry. I'm sorry I've been a bully and a tyrant. And the cell is like a kid, is very forgiving. It's just like a bully on the playground who has been bullying kids. And one day the bully comes with a soft heart and says, hey, I'm sorry. And kids are very forgiving. A bully comes and says, I'm sorry. The kid forgives the bully. So it is with the cell. When insulin becomes low and comes to the cell with a humble head and say, I am sorry, the cell says, you know what, I can work with insulin now. So when insulin tells the cell, hey, knock, knock, cell, open your doors yay wide so I could bring in glucose, the cell opens its doors yay wide, reversing insulin resistance like that. So that is what the Unamate, because of its property of lipolysis, fat burning, causes the reversal of insulin resistance. The first and the second way in which you develop insulin resistance is reversed by the Unamate. Now, the other product is in the in this system, it's a fiber matrix. It's a nutraceutical made from about 7 different fiber plants. And fiber is very important in insulin signaling, and it helps to reverse insulin resistance exactly the same way as this slide. It causes lipolysis, frees the cell of the fat that the cell had, and causes more glucose to be able to go into the cell. It will be exactly the same way that Unamate does. But the other thing that fiber does is that fiber helps to bring down your glycemic index. It causes you not to have a high glucose spike. Why is that? If food is supposed to move through the colon by this speed, fiber causes food to move through the colon by this speed. The fast transit of food through the colon, the implications of that is fast absorption, is fast digestion. Fast digestion results in fast absorption and the quick release of glucose into the blood, which is no bueno. You don't want quick release of glucose into the blood. The slow transit of food through the colon, which fiber secures, results in slow absorption. Slow absorption causes a slow release of glucose into the blood, which is what you want. And this is how it looks like. If you and I went to, let's say you and I were feeling hungry one evening and we both felt like eating lasagna, and we decide to go to our favorite Italian restaurant to enjoy lasagna. And you order your plate of lasagna, that's you. Let's do this. You order your plate of lasagna, that's you. And I order my plate of lasagna, okay? So you don't know anything about fiber and what it does to your glucose spikes. So you order your plate of lasagna, you eat your plate of lasagna without consuming any fiber. This is what your blood sugar is going to do. Your blood sugar is going to do this. And that spike in your blood sugar may be a blood sugar of 180, okay? So for me, I know a thing or two about fiber. I know that this nutraceutical product contains fiber, and that fiber is going to blunt the rise in my glucose. So I consume this nutraceutical product first, which is loaded with fiber, and I consume the same quantity of lasagna that you ate. What my blood sugar profile is, glycemic index or blood sugar profile is going to look like, is going to look like this, and my blood sugar there may be 90. So you and I have consumed exactly the same plate of the same plate of lasagna, the exact same quantity. You paid $45 for your plate of lasagna. I paid $45. You consume the same quantity of lasagna as I did. Your blood sugar went up to 180. Because your blood sugar went up to 180, your pancreas is going to have to produce a commensurate higher amount of insulin to address that blood sugar of 180. So for you, your pancreas may produce 20 units of insulin to deal with that blood sugar of 180. Okay? For me, my blood sugar only went up to 90 because, the balance, which is loaded with fiber, blunted my glucose rise. And so my pancreas is going to have to produce a commensurate lower amount of insulin to deal with that blood sugar of 90. So for me, my pancreas may produce only 5 units of insulin. Now, this is what I want you to have in mind. Think about 20 units of insulin as the crazy CEO, who his employees did not respect, who had gone off when insulin is too high. Think about 5 units of insulin as the humble CEO, who the employees respect. When your insulin is running low, your cells are more sensitive, to insulin. Insulin works better. So that's what fiber does. The other thing is that because of this glycemic profile, you and I are gonna gain different amount of calories from this plate of lasagna. So because your blood insulin is what we call an anabolic hormone. So insulin is an anabolic hormone. When we say anabolic, it means that it stores calories. Insulin is an anabolic hormone. So the higher your insulin levels, the higher the amount of calories you will store from that meal. So for you whose insulin was 20 units, from this plate of lasagna, you may gain 950 calories, okay? For me, because my insulin I only produce 5 units of insulin from this same plate of lasagna, same quantity, I would have gained only maybe 350 calories. A big difference. That's what fiber does. So it helps to reverse insulin resistance also, not just by lipolysis, but decreasing your body, your glycemic index, making your insulin spikes to be lower. The lower your insulin, the more humble, your insulin is, the more receptive your cells are to it. The other thing is that fiber helps to reverse dysbiosis. Okay. Remember, I mentioned in this slide that fiber is food for the microbiome. Fiber is food for the microbiome. Unfortunately, we do not consume enough fiber. Fiber is food for the microbiome. Every living organism, whether it's a lion in the jungle of Cameroon, where I'm from, or a bacteria in your gut, any living organism needs nutrients to survive. And the nutrients, the food for the microbiome is fiber. So because this is low, because the balanced product is loaded with fiber, it helps to feed the microbiome and causes the health of the microbiome, reversing microbiome imbalance or microbiome dysfunction, dysbiosis. Now, I will say this. Um, More scientific evidence is out there more and more that when the core of these issues are reversed, the insulin resistance and dysbiosis are reversed, you can reclaim your health again. you can restore your health again. And the Feel Great system, these two nutraceutical products, offer us today the possibility of reversing the insulin resistance and reversing the dysbiosis. And when you reverse the insulin resistance and reverse the dysbiosis, you can have reversal of the conditions that plague you. So the Feel Great system has become a very favorite tool that I have been using now to help a lot of patients to be able to restore their metabolic health. And so I close with a bold statement. If you suffer from any chronic medical condition, chances are that chronic medical condition are as a result of metabolic dysfunction stemming from insulin resistance and microbiome dysfunction. And the Feel Great System nutraceutical product gives you the opportunity to reclaim your health again. Thank you.